lonely stage show calling by name. Well, count the angels dancing on the plain. What a bright as the sky from which it came. And the baby's on the earth that takes it in. Will I speak for standing beside the rain? Listen to the thunder shout. I am, I am, I am, I am.
Folks, welcome inside the Parisi Palace, high above 3773 East Broadway. This is the Jake Feinberg Show, coming to you on Power Talk. Thank you so much for making us part of your day today, and what an honor it is to bring back a guy who is always on my mind, somebody who is always up for any challenge, be it electronically or, you know, in terms of building or music-wise. He still gets off on challenges, and he actually remains incredibly accessible in this time. I had 4 wonderful interviews with him before the pandemic, and I thought it was high time to have him come back on the program. Dan Healy, welcome back to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Hey, Jake. A lot of people. I'm on a lot of people's mind, just like a burr under your saddle. Anyway, what's up, Doc?
Well, there's a lot. I mean, quite a bit on the plate here. Dan, I wanted to ask you if you could. We've talked about it a little bit before, but you went down to the Whiskey A Go-Go in '68. You'd been on the road with Treese in the Bicycle for a couple of years, '67, '68, and I think, from my own speculation, you were really pushing to be a full-time bandstand musician. And then tragically, Butch passed away. And at that point, I'd like you to talk about, I mean, you didn't go back to the Dead at that point. You went to go produce records for Dr. John and Doug Somm. And I wanted you to talk about, in your own view, were you ready to pursue a career as a professional musician before Butch died?
Well, that's a monumental tragedy that to this day affects my life. It's just something that took a piece of me that never came back. Butch was the best drummer that ever walked the face of this earth. I don't know if have you read any of my dissertations about the Bicycle?
Well, we've taught. I mean, you've told me over and over how I've been still waiting to get some of those.
We had a really good band, and we were on the threshold of making it. When you go back in those days, when you were booked at the Whiskey A Go-Go, that means that you were there to be looked at by all the record companies and stuff. So you sort of had made it by then. Okay, so we had Taj Mahal open for us. We had 5 nights there. Taj Mahal open for us, and the scourge of drugs snuck in. I'm not really sure what happened. Butch had rheumatic fever when he was a kid, and they said he died of a heart attack, but I know that the guy, at the end of the second night at the Whiskey, which, by the way, we did really well. We were very well received, got really good reviews, and the audience loved us, and they were excited that we were there and wanted us to, and it was all really happening. We had great material, great songs. Stephen Fisk, one of the great songwriters, he's still around doing stuff.
I know. What about Alan Rose too?
Al Rose, right. We got Alan and Butch and Richard and myself and Steve. Steve was not, that was his first experience in a band. He was a side of a songwriter and kind of a do-it-yourselfer, folky sort of guy. But very astute guy and really well versed in the concept of lyrics and stuff, and he had great stories to tell. His songs were fabulous stories and fabulous lyric lines and fabulous thoughts and ideas and stuff. And he had that going really well. And it's a long story, and there's a whole huge chapter in my book, several chapters that run down the whole Bicycle experience that's coming out here soon. But long story short, we had made it, And then after the second night, that tragedy happened. The next morning, I was in a hotel room in town, and Richard and Butch and Alan went to this guy named Quentin, who was a notorious dope dealer. And if I could get my hands around his throat, I would probably squeeze off his hair.
Please, for me as well.
But at any rate, I mean, there's a few people around over the years that I've run into that's done those kind of things to my friends and loved ones, but that I would love to get my hands on. At any rate, my phone rang about 7 a.m. It was Richard screaming and crying, saying, "Get here! You got to come here, Kip! You got to come here quick! Butch is dead!" And just, I didn't know. I was speechless. I don't remember having a car. I don't know how it was out in Topanga Canyon. He had one of those little cabins out in Topanga Canyon, and those guys went with Quentin to his place after the show. And I didn't really want him to do it. We had a sort of an unspoken rule that the band hangs together. We don't split up when we're on the road or when we're out doing gigs. But for some reason, I relented and let it happen. And I remember not feeling very good about it, but at the same time, I mean, I'm only one person. I didn't rule who went where. And so there wasn't anything I could do except for sort of accept it, even though I had a foreboding about it. I'm not saying that I had a premonition. I just didn't like the idea of everybody scattering out. But at any rate, I don't know how I must have gotten a car somehow. I don't know if I got to rent a car. I don't remember. It's like when you're in when something that traumatic happens to you, you don't remember like the immediate details. I don't remember what was going on around me. I just remember that the next thing I remember was walking into Quentin's house and seeing Butch on a couch. And that and I've never been the same since, But at any rate,
I mean, and again, I'm not even trying to open up an old wound. I mean, I know he was such a gifted player and amazing person. I just wanted you to talk about the idea of, you're numb, you don't remember the aftermath, you've never been the same since, but you did not, after the band dissolved, you chose to.
Well, here's what happened. Here's what happened. I'll give you I can give you the rest of the story. And I don't mean to take all of your listeners and watchers and viewers down with a bummer story. Tim Davis, who was Steve Miller's drummer at the time, was also a wonderful man. He came and played the rest of the remaining 3 nights with us, and it worked pretty well. I tried after the fact. I tried to find another drummer. I tried to hold the band together, but I had invested my soul and everything about me in it, I tried to keep it together, but I couldn't find anybody. I couldn't get comfortable, and my heart wasn't in it. I just couldn't make it happen. So I wound up I got to the point where I had to make money. I had to live and eat and have a place to stay. I was beyond the days of sleeping in my car, which I did plenty of in my younger years and stuff. Yeah. But and so I had to move on. Okay, and that's when. And at that point, I guess it kind of those guys tried to go on for a while, but it didn't. It wound up falling apart. We had a marvelous manager, Nat Shin, was just a great man, and he was a natural, and he loved us and was honest and good to us, and it was a gift. We were gifted with all the essentials, all the ingredients you need to make it. Were right there, right in front of us. We had them in our hands, and it's, how's the saying going? Shit in one hand and put all your hopes in the other hand and see which fills up first. Anyway,
I just want to be clear. Like the last thing on your mind was like to go back and work. You went into production again with Dr. John. Is that right?
Well, what happened is that I had signed a contract to produce records for Mercury Records.
That's right.
And so I was producing. That's when I did the Tracy Nelson stuff. I did Sir Douglas. I did Dr. John. I did a bunch of those kind of people. I did some Harvey Mandel, the Harvey Mandel album. That I took. I took his whole band. They had this huge. He wanted to do this huge band of Walk on the Water, Wade on the Water, whatever it is. It's a great thing on that.
Yeah, Wade on the Water. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and he had like 20 musician buddies that he wanted in on a track. Well, at the time I was using Columbus Recording, which is about the size of a phone booth, maybe a big phone booth. So it belonged to the Kingston Trio.
Right.
And it was a little teeny studio in the basement of the Flatiron Building at Columbus and Kearney in San Francisco. And it had the most fabulous record console. The sound in that place was just perfect. I mean, of all the records I've ever done, I like the sound of some of the early records, the Tracy Nelson Mother Earth album, the Sir Douglas album, the Honky Blues Band album. The sound on those records are just sterling. And at any rate, they wanted to do that, so they were, come on, Dan, you got to, come on, Dan, help us happen. So I said, okay. So what I did is I went to my friend Chet Helms, who ran the
Sure.
Avalon Ballroom.
Yeah.
And I said, Chet, let me use the ballroom. He said, okay. And so we hauled the multi-track tape machine and Bob Matthews, who was one of the Grateful Dead kind of roadie sound helper guys. And he was my helper on that project. And we lugged all that equipment up the back stairs of the Avalon Ballroom on Sutter Street. And I guess it's on Sutter. Yeah, I think it is. Anyway, and we set up a portable recording studio. We didn't use the stage. I used to use the dance floor, the whole dance floor. I made a huge, big semicircle orchestra, like you would set up a 30-piece orchestra. There was hand drums. There's all kinds of players, two pianos, at least a half a dozen people playing hand drums and stuff, all kinds of stuff. Trap drum set. George Raines, I think, played trap drums on it, and we set it up, and I recorded the basic tracks there for that one. And what is the other one?
We're talking about Mandel right now.
Yeah, Harvey Mandel.
Wow, that is incredible. You
record it live. That's a really nice record too. And also the other song on it that I really like is I'm brain dead right now.
It's fine. You know what it is. Here's what I want to ask you really about. You were on the road a lot in 67, 68 with Trees.
Yes, I was.
Okay.
I had a sound system, and I was doing a Grateful Dead, and I was doing Quicksilver Messenger Service.
Right. No, and what I'm saying is I'm wondering because they were still working with that 1920s talking movie stuff. If you were like, the sound is, I can't do the engineer. I want to be a musician. You know, like at a certain point where you just like. Well,
I've always I grew up in a musical family. My mother was a professional musician, and one all-time great piano player. My dad wasn't professional, but he could definitely hold his own. He had a Hammond organ he played.
And your grandma too.
Not my grandma. That's a misnomer. My
grandfather.
Yeah.
Dad, okay. Thank you.
He played 12-string guitar back in the 1920s. It was fashionable to gather in the lobbies of the big hotels. That's why some of the big old hotels from that era have these grandiose lobbies.
That's right.
And stuff. And if you ever watch that movie Hotel, the hotel in the lobby of that movie is what that was like. But people would gather there, and they would have tea parties and stuff. And there was always some kind of entertainment. And my grandfather played and sang 12-string and sang and wrote his own. I still have his musical manuscripts.
Wow.
I somehow fell heir to, but I never really knew him. I only met him once when I was about 10 years old. I met him for about 30 minutes once, and I was impressed with him. He was by then retired, and he had a rock shop on the coast, on the Oregon coast. Where he polished rocks and collected rocks off the beach and polished rocks, and that's what he did. But he was there was bad blood between him and my mother, and so he was always billed as sort of a persona non grata. But I saw him and I immediately liked him, and I wish I would have gotten to know him because there's an affinity I have with him.
Mm-hmm.
I sort of got cheated out of, but that's all part of life. But at any rate,
well, no, yeah. So I wanted you to just talk about like.
So I took piano lessons. My mother gave me piano lessons when I was a kid, and I knew a little bit about music. It wouldn't be honest to say or accurate to say I read music, but I can look at, if you give me enough time, I can look at it and decipher. I can see a piece of music and tell you what notes are what, and so on and so forth. So I always had the concept of arrangement in my head, and when bands would start playing, and in those days, you got to understand, rock and roll in the '60s really became when all of the leftover folkies got brave enough to get electric guitars after they wanted to hang Dylan from a low limb in
Right.
England. He survived it, so everybody went out and got electric guitars. But it was a mishmash of that kind of stuff, and there was no real organization to it. It was kind of like bluegrass music from the hill music. I call it hill music, but yeah, it was an interesting concept. And anyway, so people would just play the chords and sing the lyrics and stuff, and there wasn't really any organization or there wasn't any overview. And I really saw. I would hear bands play, and I go, why don't you do this? Or why don't you put the song together like this? What if you laid it out like this? And how about getting loud here and getting soft here and doing this? And, program some sort of interest into it. Make it a little more complex. Don't keep it, keep it going. Don't make it too simple. But try to organize it a little bit, because it comes out better and it's more interesting to listen to. And so I always had that. But I also, because I was that gyro gear loose kid.
Right, you built stuff. You were hot rodding stuff. Yeah.
There's gyro gear loose right there.
I know. I love it.
All right. So anyway, I was always that kid in school and stuff. I was the guy that everybody's like, "Oh, look out for that geek," I was always that geek. I was.
Dude,
a geek.
You were an avatar. Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
And so when I stumbled into the music scene, which is a long story, but I won't go into, but when I stumbled into the music scene, by the grace of some higher power, we all migrated like lemmings to San Francisco in like 1963, 64, 65. And we all sort of found ourselves, we were all kind of the same person. And we came from the sort of very similar roots, and we all had that sense that something's got to happen here. It's not going where I want to go, and we have something we want to say. We need to put it together. Well, we were somehow miraculously drawn together or placed together where we ran into each other, and we found out we all shared the same affinity, and so we began comparing notes and getting together, and it was that the situation of everybody. It was like a potluck. Everybody brought what they had, and we pooled it, and had lunch, And so, because I knew about sound and microphones and recording and stuff and how to make all that junk work, I was immediately conscripted into that duty. So I was like the first one to take bands into the recording studio. When I started in the studio, it was one microphone over the band. Well, that didn't really work out in rock and roll. It couldn't have worked out.
That's right.
They called it the balance. And when you went into the studio, it was really regimented. It was left over from the big band era and early broadcasts and stuff. So it would be one microphone, and the engineers sort of ran everything. And you weren't allowed to turn up, change your volume. And they told you how to set your guitars and amps and stuff. And that just didn't work. For you got to remember, we were all just learning how to play then. We had no concept or idea of what to do or how to do it. So it was full-blown experimentation. But since we had gotten there somehow, by the grace of the Great Spirit and on our own impetus, we had managed to wind up together. It really became a matter of, okay, this is where we're going, or this is what we want to do, and we don't really care where it goes. This is what we're doing for right now, and we're going to see what happens. Nobody ever then had any even remotest, wildest idea in your wildest dream that any of this was going to become anything. We all thought it was sort of like, okay, this will be okay for a while, and then we'll all wind up getting thrown out on the street and have to get a straight job or something, right? So nobody was sitting back going, "Oh, now that we're gonna become famous someday," and blah 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 blah, all that. None of that was on anybody's mind. It was happening. Anything that was happening 10 minutes from now was beyond the horizon, the scope of horizon, and so, or the horizon of scope, I should say. At any rate.
No, let me. So I want to go back to something for a minute.
Sure.
Because you were. And we vetted this before about you were always sympathetic to the tapers, and which is one reason you created the taper section. But I want to go back, Humboldt County, growing up, Reno or San Francisco or local. I want you to talk about early experiences as Dan Healy, the taper. Were you going to see show bands in Reno? Where were you going?
No.
Talk about your early pirate radio and early recording.
Well, when I was a kid, I built my own radio station in a little town that I grew up in Northern California, which was a town of 220 population, 220 people. There was no radio of any kind. Late at night, AM radio would come in, and I had a little radio I could put under the covers, and I pull the covers over my head. Turn that damn thing off, and go to sleep. So I would put it under the covers, and I could tune in San Francisco stations and Seattle stations and Portland stations and Denver stations. Wow. And I could listen to old radio shows and stuff like that, and music and whatever came in on whatever the radio stations were broadcasting in those days. And that was really a love for me. But I built my own radio station. There was a huge redwood tree outside my bedroom window. It was at least 100 feet tall. I climbed to the top and put a piece of wire all the way up to the top of it, and that was my transmitted broadcast antenna. And you could hear it all over this little town. And
no way.
And after school, we would play radio after school. I had a little microphone that I had made out of an earphone, and I had a 45 RPM turntable that I could play 45 RPM records. And we would play records and talk and laugh and joke. And everybody in town used to listen to us. It was pretty far out. And
I mean, that is amazing. That's so. It was a hard. The sonic. Everyone was able to hear it through their radios, or
everybody's radio could pick it up. It was that we broadcast on 830 kilocycles. It was an AM station.
It was an AM station. Now, again, I know you were a jazz head. We've talked about Bill Evans, but I mean, did you go early on and tape Mingus? Who were some of the jazz?
Well, I started when I left the Humboldt County. Yep. I had to get out of there. It was one of those, you had to, I think I mentioned this to you, but up there it was the timber industry. It was logging and lumber, and for after World War II, the so-called housing boom. Well, all the houses were built from wood from the Pacific Northwest, and it was all lumber industry. So when you got out of school there, you got a job in a sawmill, knocked up a chick, and that was it. You were done. That was it for your life, right?
Right.
So
not Dan Healy though.
I couldn't do it. I had to get out, and I escaped. One day I had an old 53 Mercury. I piled my guitar and all my records in that Mercury, and I just drove away and never went back. Mm-hmm. Anyway, when I got to the Bay Area, I hung out I had a friend that was an engineer at a radio station. He's the guy that built KFOG in San Francisco. He's the engineer that originally built the original studio and built the transmitter and built it all for the corporation.
What was his name?
Ernie McDaniels.
Wow.
And
you befriended him when you moved down there, or you knew him from?
I met him when I moved down there.
Got it.
And he sort of mentored me in a way, took me under his wing, and he loaned me a pair of condenser microphones. And then I had another friend that had a Crown tape recorder, stereo 2-track Crown tape recorder. So I would go around in those days, there weren't tape recorders. I mean, there was tape recorders in the recording studios, but there weren't cassettes. There were like home. You got a home wallet sack or something.
That's right.
Those kind of things. They were really crude, and they didn't lend themselves to any kind of audio quality. So what happened is that I had this machine, and bands were. Jazz was really, really happening in the San Francisco Bay Area in those days, and most all of the clubs all had jazz groups playing there, either nightly or on the weekend, and so on and so forth. There was a place in Sausalito called the Great Gatsby's that had jazz on Sunday afternoon, and a guy named Lou Morello, who's he plays vibraphones, had like, I think it was like a quartet or sextet or something, and Pierre Josephs was.
Whoa, this is really so hip, man. This is unbelievable. Okay, continue.
Well, was a bass player, and so I would go and record. I don't know how I got to know these guys, but I would take my Crown tape machine and these 2 condenser microphones, and I would record them, and that was a big deal for a band to hear themselves back. You just didn't get recorded in those days. You had no idea what you sounded like live, other than what people told you and stuff. There just wasn't any way of doing that, and so I would make these nice stereo recordings, and then I got these 2 huge mic stands, and I put the microphones. I did a stereo configuration over the top of the bands, and it was almost a single microphone, except for it was 2 because it was stereo. But I would record these guys, and then we would all get together and have playback sessions and listen back to the tapes and stuff. I don't have any of those tapes. I have no idea what became of all of those tapes.
Okay, this is so. But they were playing. It was. Did they have monitors, or it was just like acoustic? Because, I mean, at that time, early 60s in jazz was pulsating. A lot of it was still very acoustic. Fusion had not, I hate that word, but it had not come in.
It hadn't become fusion yet. It was still pretty much traditional jazz. And a lot of it was cool jazz. And Lou Morello's band was right. It verged on fusion if it verged on anything. But because it wasn't just, it was more bebop-y and less cool jazzy, but he was a good player, and they had a nice sound, a nice sounding group. And the owner of Gatsby, there was like a storeroom that was up a little flight of stairs. You went up this little half a flight of stairs, and there was this long walkway, and the bathrooms were up there, the pissers, and also a room up there was like a storeroom, and the manager or owner guy, I conned him into letting me use that room, and that became my control room. So I had monitor speakers and a little monitor amp and all of that stuff set up, and so I could listen and monitor. But some of the clubs I went and recorded at, they were so small and there was so little room that I just had to use earphones. So I had to learn how to mix on earphones, which you can't really. There's no real way to listen to earphones without getting what I call audigo. You get so sucked into it, you can't really make
audigo.
You can't make rational value judgments about the content of the mix and stuff. Listen to the earphones. I know people have tried to do it, but I've yet to hear a good mix that someone made with earphones. All right.
Did you venture into the Jazz Workshop, Basin Street West? Did you go?
No, I did Basin Street West, but I didn't do the Jazz Workshop.
I know you were a shearing freak. Did you?
I was a shearing freak.
Did you? First of all, can I ask you the Morello band? Like, those cats were not playing like. I mean, the bands had no way of hearing back what did they like the most?
They had no idea.
They just like the tone. They didn't even know what tone they had. I mean, I'm curious about what they loved.
That's correct. That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah. That's what I'm trying to say. Wow. Yeah, it wasn't until they heard themselves back on a pair of stereos. I had a pair of stereo bookshelf speakers. I don't know where I got them or whatever became of them, but they were my monitor speakers. And so after the gig was over, we'd all pile into this room and have a playback session. We sit there and drink beer and listen to the music played back, and it blew everybody away. You know, people were blown away by that. And I went around. I got enough of a reputation that people would the bands and the clubs would let me in because I had a reputation for recording it, and everybody was digging it. So it lent itself to me. And that's where I really learned the rudiments of recording, the real basic rudiments. But by then I was also hanging out in recording studios and stuff, and that's a whole long story.
Well, no, we've talked about that. Absolutely. No, so I want to be clear though. I interviewed Mountain Girl since the last time we talked, and she now this is down in Palo Alto, but I'm just curious about. Did you actually ever see Mother McCree's Uptown Jug Chant? Did you know
Not ever. No, I never really did.
Bob Matthews was playing a washtub bass with them, which was
yeah.
But you didn't 63 because this is always the erogenous zone for me with Healy. 63, 64. That was.
No, 63 and 64 was commercial recorders, and my entrance into the scene was John Cipollina and Quicksilver.
That's right. No, absolutely.
Because I lived on a houseboat next door to Bobby Collins, who did the first shows at the original Old Fillmore. He was the show promoter, and the Quicksilver was crashing at his place, his houseboat, and I got to know those guys. But and I was also working at commercial recorders, which I started as a gopher, as a flunky. I started as a janitor. I swept the place out at night and stuff. But I got to hang out there. The first time I saw a real recording studio, it blew me away. I knew it was an epiphany. It was my life epiphany. I walked up these little steps into the control. We had an elevated control room, and the double windows. You look down out over the studio, so you're up above, so you look down over the studio. And I remember seeing all the equipment, the record board, and all the tape machines, and all the meters lighted up and everything. It was like pretty dark in the control room at the time I first walked in, and I knew I was home, and that was it. And I knew I was home, and I knew that from that minute on, that's what I was going to do. And from that minute on, that's what I did. I just stopped doing everything else. I had a couple of day jobs, straight jobs. I worked when they were building BART in San Francisco. Wow. I worked for a company that had water pumps, and they would pump out when they were doing, it was just out on Mission Street. They would pump out the big troughs they cut to put the BART tunnel in and stuff to keep the water, because water from the bay would seep in. The workers couldn't work there, so this company had a contract for pumping out the water, and I worked for this company. I would go out and put these damn pumps in the muddy water, pump it out, and that kind of stuff. It was a weird job, but it was a day job. And the thing is, it started really early in the morning, so I was off by like 3 or 3:30 in the afternoon, and so I could beat it to the studio and have maximum time to hang out in the studio. So I had that job for a while, but eventually I met Phyllis Heath, and I started staying with her houseboat called the Woggle Bug in the Corte Madera Channel. And then I quit that job. I never, that was the last straight job I ever had. And,
well, here, this is something I wanted to get on the record. You please talk about when and how you joined the New Riders of the Purple Sage.
I don't consider myself having ever been a member of the New Riders. I played with them a few times probably, but that was it. Nelson played with Healy Treese Band a few times.
Right.
But I played with them a little bit, but I don't really remember that much of that.
Okay. There's a really interesting, if you don't know, someone was taping you at the Bayou in D.C., 1980. You were on a Healy Treese run, and you were talking very exuberant. And you're like, I was in the New Riders. That's why the only reason I asked, I wasn't sure because there were different moving parts.
I played with him probably a few times, but I didn't consider. Buddy Cage was a lifelong friend of mine.
Yeah, great pedal steel player.
I was friends with all of those guys. Marmaduke lived here at my house with me.
That's right.
So when I first bought this house, he lived here for 3 or 4 months. He crashed here when the Nerfs were just getting going. And he lived, and Marmaduke and Darlene and I had a little trio we would play and go around and play and sing together. And we call ourselves Huey, Louie, and Dewey. And there's a tape from us playing live on KPFA. We went over there and did a couple of live sets and stuff. But we played around. The three of us had like a kind of a little folk trio for a while. And we would play country music and sing and stuff. Darlene was a fabulous singer. And it was singing with her was wonderful.
Again, we're going to play this game, Name That Voice, for Dan Healy. Take a listen to it and the content, and we'll come back.
It was right off of Highway 101
Yes.
in Ignacio, right next to Hamilton Air Force Base. It was a pink warehouse, just your generic pink warehouse, kind of, off the frontage road. And it was where the Grateful Dead rehearsed. Various people crashed there from time to time. I mean, that's where I first met the artist Bob Thomas, who did the Skull and Lightning Bolt logo, and he also did the logo for Alembic and album covers for the Dead. And I first met him there, and then later got to know him through a much folkier connection, because he was a bagpipe player and all really a musical historian and one of the original Renaissance Fair musicians. Anyway, so there's the Pink Warehouse. The Dead rehearsed there. The Grateful Dead's office was there, and there was a little shack in back where Ron Wickersham had his little lab and was living with his wife, and Bear called the place Alembic. His idea was to gather together engineers, technicians, craftspeople to advance the state of the art of musical equipment. I mean, he had been, he had quite a interesting background, to say the least, but he was self-taught in electronics. He knew a little bit about everything, and when it was important to him, he would find out a lot about whatever that thing was that was important. And he decided that this artificial difference between stage gear, studio gear, and home hi-fi gear was just ridiculous. He thought it should all be at the same quality level.
Mr. Healy, who is that?
I would say Rick Turner.
You are correct, 1 for 1. Mr. Healy, so much is going in my head, but two questions. Owsley, I just want you to talk about, I know that he was a maniac and he set your speakers on, but I want you to just, for cats, that my kids and younger generations, why did you respect him? And also,
I didn't particularly respect him.
You didn't respect. I mean, okay, so
no. Here's what it is.
Go ahead.
Originally, I was the one that had the most electronic expertise before Wickersham was there or anything. I was one of the Rick Turner and I were to be the two original partners in Alembic. Alembic is an alchemical term. It's about turning water into gold or something. Making gold out of pot metal or something.
I love it.
Anyway. No one has done it yet, but that was Owsley's little scam or dream. Anyway, and I didn't really want to. That was after. I didn't really want to get tied down. I was doing doing a lot of studio recording, and I liked my studio work. I liked my life in the studio. I liked producing records. I liked engineering and mixing records and stuff. And I didn't really want to get hung up there, so I passed on it. And what happened is that. This was in 1969, I think.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
The Pink Warehouse.
It was after the bicycle tragedy,
mm-hmm.
and I was back in the studio doing stuff, and what happened is that Matthews and Betty were recording a Grateful Dead record at. There's a guy named Paul Curcio who had, I can't think of the name of the studio in San Mateo. He recorded the Mojo Man. He was one of the Mojo Men.
Interesting. Okay, so what's his last name?
Curcio, Paul Curcio.
I don't know. Okay, continue.
I can't say the name of the studio. It's also where Santana did their original recording. But at any rate, I split and I went back into the studio because I wanted to do my own thing, and so the Matthews and Benny recording a record, but they had no knowledge or ability about how the equipment worked. So what happened is when the Ampex tape recorder started acting up, they called Ampex to send a repairman to fix the machine. Wickersham was the repairman that got sent.
Wow.
And he got sort of conscripted into the scene via that. And Ron, I have ample respect for Ron, and I think the world of him. I consider him a friend, and he became. So then Owsley roped him in, because Owsley needed somebody that knew about electronics, and so Ron was a pretty well a college trained engineer. He knew all the math and all that stuff, so he could actually do all that stuff. He was really good at it, and is really good at it, and so. He got involved, so then Lemby became Rick Turner and Owsley and Wickersham, but then that kind of soured. And Rick Turner kind of got a bum deal out of that too, but that's another whole story. But at any rate, I didn't really want to be tied up. I didn't really like Owsley that much. Okay, I mean I could take him or leave him, to be honest.
Right. No, I want to be clear, just because fundamentally, like you talked about in our earlier interviews, Garcia was moving away from Owsley's concept of the sound.
Well, the complete control freak thing.
Exactly. So you just
Owsley didn't like that.
So you just in general, it wasn't even just like philosophical differences, just personality-wise, you did not really dig. Take him or leave him.
Right. Yeah, and I also I wasn't. His whole attitude of dosing people with LSD didn't really set with me. That's a form of invasion of privacy that I don't. It's taking away someone's liberties, and I don't. That's not me.
You're talking about unknowingly getting dosed.
Unknowingly.
Yeah, that's
right.
I mean, I must say that is. Is there any quality that I don't want to say what you admired, but I mean, I guess what is his folklore maybe too big in your mind? Do you think he gets too much?
Well, I don't know, because who knows how that. Who knows what spurns all of that? Who knows? I know and understand. I think the whole folklore thing is one of the things that killed Jerry Garcia. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I know people worship for certain things is something that I don't think there's. I don't see room for that in humanity. I don't see how that furthers humanity at all. But who knows? When people when somehow you get deemed a special person by a large body by, for instance, an audience or followers or something like that. I've never understood exactly why that happens, and I've totally never understood the need for it. But I know that it happens, and I've seen the effect that it has on people. For me, I had Owsley could do some stuff, and I don't mean to take any of it away from him, but. I didn't need it. I had my own stuff, okay? And I always felt that way. I always felt like I had my own stuff. I didn't need to be anointed by Owsley, or I didn't need Owsley's help or guidance or information for me to get from point A to point B. I had my own yo-yo. I played my own.
I dig. And then somehow he still felt the need to have to tell you this stuff, and you were like, I already know what I'm doing, But
well, I spent too much time bailing his ass out of stuff.
Just because Turner later in that clip talks about he was sort of the wood and metal guy, could build things, could fuse them together. What was your major role? I don't want to say. I mean, were you making pickups at the Pink Warehouse?
I was not making pickups. I never once made pickups. I was in on discovering what the shortcomings in existing pickups were, and right. But I think Ron Wickersham is really the one that deserves the credit for that. Okay. He's the one that got into the magnetics and into winding and magnet material and so on and so forth. He produces a bass guitar that easily goes below the lowest note, and there's no low end out of a bass guitar like Wickersham's pickups would. And I have to really admire him for that. And I really admire every time I play with somebody that has a bass like that. I finally can enjoy playing music because I can hear the bass. Okay, so. I would say I would credit Wickersham for that. I started hopping up stuff and I got I got really involved in that early on when I discovered how, like, you would go to, well, equipment failed a lot. It didn't travel well, and it didn't sustain, or it didn't hold up under electronic and musical abuse and stuff. So it crapped out a lot. Even Fender amps, they weren't really that reliable, and so I started hot rodding them. Mainly, I really initially began just trying to make them make it through a show without crapping out and stuff. No matter how hard you played them, how much you fed them back, and no matter what kind of abuse you gave them to keep them up and running and on the air. And so that's really where I started. But then after that, I started studying some of the shortcomings of the circuit design, and that's when I started getting into modifying the circuit design to make better sounding amps and so on and so forth. So that I was already doing that by the time Owsley tried to rope me into Alembic, and I didn't, and I wasn't that. Again, I'm a mixer. I was born with ears, and I was born with sense of music, and I'm a kind of person that hears music, and I hear music the way I hear it in a kind of an ethereal sense. I hear what it could be, and I wanted, and so it sounds like musical instead of like some people made mixes, and it was just a pile of ingredients. It'd be like if you were making a salad. And you put a whole bunch of chopped up vegetables, but they all stayed separate, and you tried to stir them, but they didn't stir together at all. The minute you stopped stirring it, everything separated back into individual.
Yeah, that's not fun. You want the gumbo in there. You want the
the mojo.
The mojo.
The sense of it. And for me, the term of that mojo is called music. Okay. I wanted in voices and singing and in playing and stuff. For me, it was a voicing. I saw my sound system as a musical instrument, and I was finally given through no small amount of scuffling on my own. I was finally gifted with a system that I could play like a Stradivarius. I wound up with a Stradivarius, and I could play the Grateful Dead like a Stradivarius. I could portray the Stradivarius that I heard in Grateful Dead music. That's what happened. And my goal was to make the audience, to give to the audience what I heard, what I knew was going on. I wanted everybody to be able to hear it. And that was really what motivated me. And I made it, as far as I'm concerned. I took us there. And there was no small amount of it was a lifetime of hard work, because none of it came easy. It all had to pretty much be hacked out of raw material, and just trying to get that concept across. Garcia understood what I was doing. When I first started hanging out with Garcia, he understood. He recognized who I was immediately, and I recognized who he was. I liked what he was doing. Him and Hunter I liked their ideas. I liked where they were going with the music. Grateful Dead. When I first met the Grateful Dead, they were doing lots of cover tunes, but they were also breaking out this fledgling new material that Hunter, lyrics that Hunter was writing and stuff. And Jarrett could put together a melody and a song fairly decently, and wound up with a catalog of songs that they have. But what inspired me so much that I sort of veered away from the studio. I could have spent the rest of my life just making records. I probably become famous for making hit records.
Totally.
But what distracted me was I saw what those guys were up to, and it became a challenge. I wanted to see it. I thought the first time I heard these guys play, I went, man, if the audience could actually hear what these guys are really doing, it would blow them away. And but they couldn't. The sound system was so inadequate, and it's just not happening. And so so it became a matter to me. I know I got to find a way to hear what I want to hear out in the audience, so that the audience can hear it too. And that was a lifelong fight. I mean, that was a lifelong.
Well, no. So when were you the nexus to John Mayer and McCune Sound? That to me, that was the because in 16. Yeah, I just wanted let me just
worked at McCune's.
Let me just say, because I know in 69.
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, they still, like you talked about, they were still the PA systems were designed for talking movies. You know, you were exasperated by the whole thing. So
Well, they
ultimately,
call them public address systems.
public address systems, and yet,
And they call the horns trumpets.
but you basically were like, okay, I'm not going to be with Owsley or Bob. Bob Matthews and Betty. They need help with recording, but you basically devoted yourself to live mixing at that point, right?
Yeah, it was live sound.
Live sound. And so when did you were you the one that connected, or you worked with Meyer? How did that?
Yeah, but John Meyer and I both worked for McCune Sound Service way back in our early days.
We get a date on that?
There,
60 what?
Oh, 66.
Okay.
67.
Wow. That was in between the jobs of doing the BART work.
My early, because the BART stuff was there before that.
Okay.
The BART stuff was more like 63 and 64. And 65 and 66, I did McCune's. And what happened is, I worked. McCune's had an engineer, a technical engineer named Bob Cavan, who was a good guy and a good friend, and he would help me. He would help me hot rod. By then I had already been hot rodding Fender amps, and I wanted to start hot rodding the standard Altec PA equipment. McCune's was an Altec dealer, so they had all these voices of the theater, speaker cabinets, and everything. They just weren't adequate. I mean, I'd take them out to the show and they'd crap out. So I wanted to start hot rodding him, hopping him up, and he's the one that helped me do that. And at one point, I had built for McCune's a really formidable system. I could do big shows, and they sounded good. I mean, for the time, they sounded good. But there was this another guy named John Meyer who was building speakers, and he was one of those little voices that's like, "Oh, you got to hear my speaker." He recognized it too, but he built these speakers, and Colin McCune's into buying some of his speakers, so he built them for McCune. John's first speakers were model JM3. JM3s were his first speakers, and the minute I heard the first one, I knew it was over for the Altec equipment. I just knew. Okay, this is now this is where we're going to go. And John Meyer was the one that ultimately built me the Stradivarius to play.
Wow.
Okay, and I did, and it worked, and it was good. And
what was the experience? Can you just talk a little bit about 71, these early 70s years? The big challenge at that point. Number one, you were still really learning to be a musician, and you were learning to build. This idea of, let me just see, I wrote it down. This is a direct quote.
That's all right.
Designing the sound system to match the venue you're in. So once you have, like if you would go to Portchester, or what were some venues that, I mean, because you were not playing at that point Concert on the Green, and that was a few years later. I mean, what were some of the what were the trickiest venues to fit the sound?
Well, they were all tricky. First of all those big halls were they sounded like garbage cans rolling down flights of stairs.
My
there was
favorite
just
line
nothing about it that there was no way with the equipment that we had to deal with it. Well, it became a matter of now that you have a sound system, now you have to go play this venue, and you have to try to sort out what your dream is. I was trying to achieve my goal. So I said out in the audience, if I couldn't go, yeah, that's what it's supposed to sound like, then I considered myself as having fallen short.
Sure.
And so it was a continuous disappointment that motivated and spurned me to keep redesigning and doing stuff. And then it became a matter of when you set the stuff up, you don't just, sound people would set it up on the stage like it was a music store or display case or something. It's like, no, you don't do that. You got to aim the speakers and set it all up so the sound goes actually to where the audience's ears are. You don't just put it there willy-nilly. And so I began doing that, but then later on, then it became a matter of the acoustics of the building and how to deal with it and where to put the stage. Almost my entire Grateful Dead life, I was kind of in charge of the venues we played and how it was set up, where the stage went, what was done to do acoustic properties and preparation in it, and so on and so forth. So I played a large role in that kind of stuff too. I was the so-called frontman. I wore the frontman jacket in that sense because I knew that if we played in some shithole, you can't even polish a turd. All you get is a shiny turd. You know?
Can you is there a memory of you where like you were like, this is the biggest shithole venue, and then but you made a chicken salad into a gourmet dish and it worked out great? I mean,
yeah, the Greek Theater in Berkeley is one of them.
See, but like, okay, so talk about the Greek. So there's no back wall. What's the challenge there? Because that place, to me, the sound of the
horrendous echo.
Horrendous echo.
Sound reflection stuff. Yeah, and it just wasn't it's not kind of acoustics. And I conquered that place, but it took a monumental system and a lot of fucking around to get it, to set up the system, to get scaffolding so that I could aim and place the speakers exactly where I needed them to be. And another one is Red Rocks. I conquered that place. I slam dunked that place. That's one of my most proud gigs.
Well, I mean, just let's take Greek for a minute, because I don't think the shows. It's interesting to hear what was. I mean, the audience recordings that I hear coming out from the speakers by 83, 84 is the most ferocious, burning, collective gumbo of Dead I've ever heard. So 81, 82, you were still really throwing stuff at the wall, trying to get. Where did you wind up putting the speakers where they had maximum impact?
Are you telling me that the audience tapes sounded like simpering shit?
I'm saying that I only listened to 83 audience Greek theater. I feel like at that point you had a couple years to sort of get your arms around it. But I mean, can you talk about
I didn't always have a decent system. I oftentimes had to use what I had, and so you can't. Sometimes, I mean, if you have to build a bridge, then you have to build a bridge out of whatever material you can find. You use apple crates if you have to.
Absolutely.
And so there might have been some of that involved. It wasn't until the mid and late 80s. Here's what happened. By 1980, we did a show. We still didn't have we after the Wall of Sound, R.I.P. And Wall of Sound ate us up. It was just too much. And we finally abandoned it, which I was so grateful for, because it was my job to keep that goddamn system up and running, and it was a monumental amount of work. It was just endless. Every show was just endless work, and so we finally retired it, and we decided that for a while, temporarily, we would just rent systems from existing sound companies without trying to own our own, without getting too involved in it, just so we could take a breather and we could all sit back. In 1976, whenever we retired the Wall of Sound, we played 11 months that year, and we were broke. All the money was going into the Wall of Sound. Just sucked all the money out of everything. It was so extravagant. When the whole gas crisis thing happened and gas was hideously expensive, all of that shit.
Totally. Well, then this was after the hiatus or before? Because 74, the Wall of Sound was retired that year. 75 was the hiatus year, so to speak.
Yeah, all right.
And then 76, they came back.
The hiatus year was the Grateful Dead movie for me.
That's right. Yeah.
But at any rate, when we came back, we just decided to do rent-a systems. But rent-a system, bless their hearts, I had Shoko, I had Clare Brothers, I had everybody at one tour or another. And I loved all those people. They're all wonderful people, and they took good care of us, and they really cared. But the equipment was just too...
they were not. They're very well meaning. The equipment sucked.
Once you hear what it's supposed to sound like, and then it's like unknowing something. Once you know a truth, you can't unknow it. You can't go inside your brain and erase it. Right?
How true.
So then what happened is that
by 1980, go ahead.
We would play home gigs. Look, when we played around home, it's too expensive to try to bring Shoko or Clare Brothers all the way to San Francisco to do a gig. So Don Pearson and I decided to try to do a system, our own homebrew system. So we had innovated some great ideas and built some equipment, and we were playing around with stuff. And we did. There's a place called the Henry J. Kaiser Auditorium in Oakland,
of course,
which is about 7,000 people, and it's a cavernous place that doesn't sound very good. It's a lot like Winterland, but And we decided we were doing a show there. So we set up this experimental 5-way system. And we called in all the equipment, we raked in all the equipment we could get our hands on and put it all together. We had built our own crossovers. We had the ability to delay, to do minor, simple delays and stuff, to time align the speakers and things. And it was an experiment in that kind of stuff, because once again, it was another one of those, in order for this to sound good, there's certain basic things, certain basic rules that we discovered, truths that we discovered that you have to comply with, otherwise you can't get there. And so we built this system, and it was it sounded fabulous. It worked perfect. And so at that point it was like, okay, now how are we going to go back to
rent a
and they were mostly Altec speakers. Clare Brothers had their own system, and that was kind of a little bit better, but not that much better. And so it became a matter, how are we going to go back? But at that point, I think we buttonholed John Meyer to come in when we did that experimental system and gave him a taste of it. John, bless his heart, is a genius at all of that kind of stuff, but he's not a musician and he's not a sound mixer.
He's a mathematician, right? I mean, definitely.
Yeah, he's a mathematician, and he's really knows all of his stuff, and he's really done his work. And there is no finer sounding sound system on the face of this earth than his stuff when it comes to doing large scale sound. But he also got studio monitor speakers nowadays that are just staggering. But at any rate,
so a couple questions. Did you? It's ironic you said 1980. Did you use those Warfield reckoning sessions to really work on your own system? And when did you actually start to take out your own system and not have to rent that?
So what happened is that John said, all right, I'm going to put together some stuff. And the original stuff that he built, our woodshop, Winslow and those guys, the Hard Truckers woodshop, built the cabinets and stuff.
That's right, yep.
And so he put together a system that was enough to take out and do shows, as long as they weren't monumentally huge shows. And so he put together a system. So we started. So that's when ultrasound started. That was the beginning of ultrasound. Wow. So Meyer put up the equipment, and ultrasound managed the equipment and saw to it, and we all toured with it. So it wasn't really owned by the Grateful Dead, and the equipment wasn't stored in the Grateful Dead equipment hall or practice hall or studio complex. It was so technically speaking, we still had rent a system. We didn't own our own system, because there were a few of us that were totally gun shy and totally burned out about the concept of owning our own stuff. Because I think a lot of people were miffed that they could have been making more money and weren't, because of what we spent on the Wall of Sound, which was Owsley's folly as far as I'm concerned. But at any rate, it served its purpose, and it turned up a lot of stuff. And there's a whole chapter on that.
Well, I mean, so this is something that, again, in this interview with the Bayou, you got to listen. You're on fire in this interview. When did you start to do? I'm just going to read these notes here. I have cluster mic. Right. You do these cluster mics. One would be near the stage. One would be further out. You'd mic the band.
I did. Yeah, that was its own little thing. That was my recording. That was the recording person in me.
Talk a little bit, because at that point, the reason I bring that up is because you were talking to the dude in the back room at the Bayou in 1980. You said at that point, talking about 77, 78, you got at that point, musically and technically, your chops as an engineer, sound mixer, and a musician sort of linked together, and you were able to come up with this idea of basically making it sound as if you were on stage and in the audience at the same time.
Well, yeah, no, it was.
You riff on that, yeah.
It's a little bit different than that. It was about hearing a studio recording and being in the audience at the same time. So you got the full audio effect of a fabulous studio recording, but you also got the sense of the ambience of being in the audience. So what we did is we started playing with matrixing microphones called the MS system. And we designed and built these networks that would combine the two microphones and create. It's a theory that was based on how it's thought that the human brain interpolates what your two ears hear. It's how you're able to tell if a sound is behind you or in front of you, where it is above you, beside you. Got it. It's not just amplitude. It isn't just how loud it is. It has to do with the arrival times of the different harmonics and different bits of the sound. So it's very complex. It's not simple like you might think. Oh, it's on my left because it's louder over there. That's not why it sounds like it's on your left. Because we created the ability to synthesize sound that you would listen to and you go, oh, that's on my left, and it would be coming from your right. So we could fool you that way by manipulating the arrival the times and stuff. So we started studying and exploring that stuff, and the object was to be able to capture the perfect. The audience was always. We always suck so bad on our records, and suck so bad on records that the audience was like, "Oh no, you got to be live. You got to be there. You got to
be live, man." I would be the same. Totally, man.
Well, it definitely became that once I got it into gear. It definitely became that. There were times, my favorite of all shows, and I know this is a really dumb thing because people ask me all the time, what is your favorite show? Well, there is no favorite show. You can't. That's like a dad of 10 kids. What's your favorite kid?
Right. A dad of 30 kids, I think.
Yeah. And so anyway, I think my favorite shows were Madison Square Garden. Now, I've had that place just rocking. I mean, literally the floor going up and down. It has a suspended floor. It would go up and down a foot. I used to have to strap down my equipment at my mix board because the floor would be going up and down. Anybody that was been there on a good night will verify what I'm just saying. But at any rate, I slam dunked and make that place sound so damn good. It just make you piss your pants, man.
You're talking about the not the old MSG, the new one.
I guess what you would say the new one, the one that's currently going.
Exactly. Now. That is unbelievable. I mean, and going back to Red Rocks, was there a moment where you were like, I'm gonna lose my shit, but then somehow you kept your head down and eventually got your head around?
The whole thing about Red Rocks is the audience is so steeped.
Right.
So it's like really, I mean, it's like very, very steep angle from the audience. The top row in the back of the audience is like, it's like 60 feet above the stage surface.
Absolutely,
okay? Yeah. It's not like a balcony. I mean, it's like a balcony in the sky. And so what happens is there was no way to set up your sound equipment that it would make it more than about 20 rows out. And by then, the audience was above the pattern of the sound. So I eventually I had my guys build me like 5-6 story scaffolding. And I put a sound system for every 10 feet. I put a separate sound system on the scaffolding. So no matter where you went from the first front row clear up to the very last row at the back, you heard the same sound. And that finally locked that place in. But another problem is this over 5,000 feet. And when you get over 5,000 feet, the air is enough thinner that it's really hard to pump sound out. Sound travels on air. And when there's no air, there's no sound. And so it takes a monumental. It takes probably 40% more acoustic energy to get the same equivalent sound pressure level at 5,000 feet as it does at sea level. Okay, so that became recording studio monitor speakers in Denver have specially made speakers that the cones have greater excursion, so they can move in and out faster to compensate for the thinness of the air.
So. A couple questions. Jack Cassidy, he said, the patrons that would show up at the Fillmore 66, 67, 68. He said, they really let Phil suck for a long time before the Dead got there. They let Phil Lesh suck for a long time.
Who's the they?
The audience, while the Dead were figuring out this conversational approach.
What do you mean they let him suck? How can anyone let someone suck if they don't suck themselves? I need more information.
So absolutely. So on top of the sound, and on top of people just learning to play their instruments.
I mean, maybe Phil sucked.
Right. Maybe he did. I mean, listen, I was just going to say, like, was Phil, I don't even know what the question is. I mean, did they got to a certain point when they could, the language.
You said that Jack Cassidy said that the audience let Phil suck.
Here's any new band that's starting. I mean, listen, whatever you want to say about Phil, he wasn't a pocket bass player. He was a lead bass player, and obviously he takes a lot of flack for that. Some people say, Phil, we need another.
He took a lot of flack for that. There were some times that he frustrated me, but in the end, I mean, everybody. For me, I take people as they come, and it's the sense of the Grateful Dead. If I began to become judicious, which I didn't, but if I were to, I would have to throw almost everybody out of that band. But
why is it just because of your musical acumen, or what?
Yeah, and and their lack of musical acumen.
Yeah, no, I get it. You said something before about Brent getting bored playing just the same. So, what was it about the? I mean, because you didn't become judicious when you step back from it, and because a lot of these guys were skiffle players, although Jerry obviously, was an amazing.
Jerry got it, but it was really playing with guys that just didn't know how to get it up on the line, and didn't know how to. I don't really want to go off into that space, but. I
just want to clear. Do you address some of this in the book at all?
I do.
Okay.
I do. It probably will make me unpopular because of some of the things I'm going to say. It isn't about my personal feelings about people. It's more about if any complaints that I lodge have to do with the gap in the difference between what I consider good musical acuity or musical alertness and musical numbness,
Well, I
don't dislike anybody, but I never did dislike anybody. And as a mixer, I always strived and went out of my way to make, no matter how poorly you were playing, I made you sound as good as I could make you sound, because I'm an artist in that sense. And for me, I was playing a Stradivarius, and I'm not going to sour my work and my mix or my sound because of my personal feelings about something. So there were times when I wanted to go up on stage and grab someone by the throat and strangle them, but I kept that to myself, and I always went out of my way. My most staunch rule of all is you're here to portray this music, and portray it, and in no uncertain term, and there's no exceptions.
So let me ask you. One guy that I love.
Go ahead.
This is. Can you just talk about?
Okay, go ahead.
I just assume that you first crossed paths with one of the guys who's been pushing me forward on this journey at the Fillmore with Bloomfield is John Kahn. Can you talk
about John?
Can you just, because Kahn? Well, I'm trying to also figure out how involved you were mixing all of the Garcia Saunders Kahn stuff. There's so much of that, and John was I think quite an accomplished musician.
I really liked John personally, and we were really good friends. And I liked his bass playing. I really enjoyed his bass playing. I think that there were a lot of times that Jerry wanted a bass player more like John. Jerry almost left the Grateful Dead at the end of the Grateful Dead movie. He had other things he wanted to do, and Grateful Dead wasn't musically challenging him anymore. And I think it was rightfully so. I think that a lot of it came up on the line, a lot of it improved over the years, but he stuck with it until, well, as far as I'm concerned, it killed him. But
this has nothing to do. Like, so he went back. I mean, I've talked to Joel Selvin. I don't know if you've ever run into that cat. Okay, he talked about the reality of in '70, like you talked about. Jerry
music critics get very little credibility.
No. He just was saying that when they took the hiatus, Jerry was considering, you just said, leaving the band. Kreutzmann couldn't afford a condo after 75. It was obvious that everybody needed each other. I mean, did you say it was a forced marriage after 75?
Yeah, I'd say it probably was. I think what happened is that everybody got Jerry in a room. Jerry was one of those guys that could not say no.
Yeah, I know.
And everybody got him in the room and gave him the, oh man, we all have families, and if you duck out, this whole thing is going to fall apart. And then what are we going to do? And he went, oh, all right. So he at that point, that's the point where Jerry started junking. Okay.
I dig. You know, before I let you go, well, a couple things. Can you?
I'm probably the lynch mob will be after me.
No, you didn't. You've been on your best behavior. When the book comes out, I can't help you there. But can you just please tell me the story? You started to tell me the story, the epic Fillmore bust, Quicksilver and the Dead.
Oh, yeah, yeah. That's a great story. It's a great story. It could have had a disastrous ending, but it didn't have. That was John Cipollina's brainchild. What happened was there was always that sort of team rivalry between Quicksilver and the Grateful Dead, and so
Sure.
I mean we all hung out together and picnicked together and had parties together and we were all good friends and stuff. But John played with the Grateful Dead a number of times, and but so what happened was something happened, and it was like, okay, we're going to get those guys. So Cipollina put together this plan. It was the plan was to go into wait till the Grateful Dead set began, then go into the Fillmore, go on stage, and John had a collection of antique guns. None of them shot or worked or anything, but they were antique. But they were real guns, but they were all antique.
They were Gino's guns, maybe.
What?
They were his dad's guns, Gino.
Say that again.
His father, Gino.
Oh no, I don't
Yeah,
think so.
okay.
I think he collected them on.
Okay.
They weren't Gino's. No. I think he collected them on his own. I don't
Yeah.
know how he acquired. In those days, people gave away stuff.
No,
like
you
that.
said you guys go down to the creek bed. Everybody had you shooting.
Well,
yeah.
that was different. We had, when we went to Mickey's Creek bed, we had machine guns and stuff.
I'm sorry, that's right. You had machine. Thank you. These
And
were
we
just
would
rifles.
shoot up. We would grab one of Weir's shitty, horrible guitar amps and shoot it up.
No, and then
Shoot up hard cymbals.
you'd blow Mickey's gongs out of the trees too.
Blow Mickey's cymbals up.
Yeah,
and stuff.
right. Symbols. That's
Yep.
right.
That was David Crosby was with us.
So John just had antique.
Steven Stills.
That's right. Cipollina just had antique.
So John,
rifles.
anyway, so what we were going to do is we're going to go in and stick up the Grateful Dead, take their instruments away from them, throw them off the stage. We're going to arrest them and hold them backstage. We're going to take their instruments and we're going to play a song. John wanted to play Kalijah was a wooden Indian. I don't know why, but that was the plan. But what happened is it was one of those humorous plans, but it backfired, and it could have gotten some people killed, but it didn't. It had kind of a funny ending. David Freiberg went through a little bummer about it, but nothing that he didn't recover from. But what happened was the Fillmore was the Fillmore in those days, and so. The night we were all in the back of the roadie for Quicksilver. His name was Greg Collins. He had this green Ford van. We were all in the back of this green Ford van, and everybody we were all dressed up like pirates.
Exactly. I was going to say you must have had disguises on.
And we had disguises and makeup and all kinds of shit. And so we were riding in, and so we were waiting for the Grateful Dead to go on, and it was one of those. They're not on yet. So we were waiting, we're hanging out in this van on a little alley around the corner from the Fillmore. And so what happens is some kind of weirdness broke out in the Fillmore, and there was people were shooting real gunshots, and people were shooting it out somewhere. And so the place within 10 minutes, there was like a cop car for every other car parked on the street, right?
Oh,
so we didn't know that. So
oh my God! Wait, hold on. I just want to be clear. Was it often the case that people would be shooting just randomly?
Well, I think in those days it kind of was.
Oh my God.
It might still. I don't know.
So you were not privy to this, so you guys just stormed right in.
No, we didn't know it was happening. We didn't. The last thing in the world we thought was something like that was going to happen. So anyway, people were outside the van walking around with their holding the guns and stuff, and the cops came screaming down this alley, and they saw these guys with guns, and needless to say, cops turned in the cops, right?
Oh.
I mean, they just went berserk and arrested all of us. And so it wound up not happening. But in those days, having pot, if you had any pot on you, you could be in serious trouble. I mean, guys were getting 10 years for a joint and stuff. I mean, really draconian, over the top, crazy shit. But and I think David got busted with some pot. They took David and somebody else to the cop shop and interrogated him, stuff like that. And he wound up I remember Brian Rohan had to get him off somehow. I think he had to get probation or I don't think he really did any time over it, other than I think he spent the night in jail and stuff. But yeah, it turned out, I mean, the cops could have shot somebody thinking we were going to shoot them. I mean, it could have been really ugly. But it was going to be fun. It was innocent fun. We were going to have a good time, and we were going to get the Grateful Dead. And
but you actually never made it into the.
You never made it in. No.
Oh, that would have been what a
never
great.
Made it in,
that would have been.
I know it would have been so good. It would have been so good, man. It's a shame.
I just was randomly looking through what's available of Healy Treese, band from the early '80s, and
I got tons of tapes.
Well, we'll talk about that later. But I couldn't believe you did have a revolving door as it related to bass players, and one of the cats who played with you in the Bay Area was Peter Barsotti.
Peter, not Peter.
Or he said Pete Barsotti, and I was
it's Barsotti, but it's
or was it Bob?
Steve Barsotti.
Steve Barsotti.
Steven.
Now he was part
Bob,
of that.
Peter and Steve. There were 5 brothers.
Okay, so and that cat played bass, or he was a real musician.
Yeah, Steve was our bass player for a while, but then Mike Larscheid was our bass player. A guy named Mike Larscheid.
Oh, dude, nasty bass player, great bass player.
Yeah,
he
was our bass player.
He's a great bass player. So Barsotti played.
We call him the Larch.
Okay, final question, because they just did a benefit, or they played some music. My buddies played some music as a benefit for him. Obviously, he was probably one of those cats who was building you all that stuff at the Red Rocks and whatnot. Can you just talk about Kid Candelario?
Oh, Kid. Yeah.
And maybe just a seminal story, especially about, you know what it is? What I love the most about the Wall of, say what you want about the fallout and how hard it was to get it around. Healy, you were not an ivory tower guy. You were clearly, you understood, and you were able to be, but then you were able to have to articulate that to guys I would consider to be very bright but blue collar, and they did a pretty good job building stuff for you. Kid was one of them. So just,
no
just talk about Kid. Talk about Kid. You know.
Well, my crew guys were the best. Sparky Razine, Mark Razine. It was Ramrod, Sparky, Joe Winslow, Kid.
Was Rex Jackson involved, or
Rex? This was after we lost Rex.
We lost Rex. All right.
And
Parrish, or
no, Johnny Hagen. John Hagen.
Wow.
Parrish was in there. I'm the one that hired Parrish into the Grateful Dead.
You did, because he was living in his car, and you got him
in?
Wow.
Yeah, he was hanging out at the Quicksilver practice hall.
And you were like, hey, I think he might be a good roadie.
Yeah. When it came up, someone said, I said, yeah, he's okay, let him in.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Kid.
Those guys, those are my crew, and I mean, there's some fabulous pictures of those guys hoisting these huge speaker cabinets, carrying them up the side of the scaffolding on their shoulders and stuff. I mean, just amazing stuff. When you see full-blown photographs of that wall of sound, that's impressive. I mean, that's awesome. Is what it is.
Awesome is what it is.
Yeah, and it couldn't possibly have happened if it wasn't for all of those wonderful men who just busted ass and gave their all to that. They're all in more. I would have those guys up and all night long doing shit. We would set up and something would be wrong, or we decided to try something new or something. And we had 2 sets of complete autonomous sets of stage, and it leapfrogged because it took so long to set up. The stage was so intricate, it took so long to set it up that we'd be in a town. The next town we play in, the stage would already be there setting it up at the venue. So then we would get there and something would be wrong. And we set up the sound system, and I'd have my crew there all night long working, trying to fix something, making cables, fixing something, working on something, building something. And nobody ever balked once. Not one time did anybody ever pull a blame on us. It was just wonderful. But one of the reasons why that made it impractical it was so bulky and so difficult, took so much time. It wasn't at all cost effective. It took so much time and energy to set it up each time. And we would play, and to playing one-nighters, we had to have leapfrogging stages, which is pretty weird, but that's how it was.
Okay, so Kid, what? Give me a seminal memory of Kid Candelario.
Well, Kid was like a teenager when he first started coming around. He was a product. I think he.
When did he start coming around?
Probably the late '60s,
Okay.
I guess.
After Parrish, after you got Parrish into the band.
No, it was before Parrish. He was around before Parrish. Parrish is one of the later comers.
Interesting.
Really. Parrish came around along about the time of the Wall of Sound, and the beginning of the Wall of Sound, which was '72. We started building the Wall of Sound in 1972. When I decided to come back to the Grateful Dead after an event that Jerry and Kreuzman asked me to come back. I was in New York City anyway. That's another story.
I just want to be clear. Because you didn't come back after Giannini. You didn't come back till '72.
That's correct. I all through that whole Alembic thing and
this
practice
is
all in Ignacio, and all of that stuff.
Were you considering being a record producer in New York?
I was, and I was doing it.
Yeah.
But I was also playing music. Darlene and I had a folk duo, and we were on tour, and the Grateful Dead was playing at the Felt Forum, which was one of the little small rooms of the Madison Square Garden complex, and I went to a show there. And I called up one of them when I was in town, and we got to shooting the shit. And they said, "Hey, come on over." So I said, "Okay." So Darlene and I had a night off, and so I said, "Okay." I went over there, and I got to talk. It's a long story, but anyway, at that point, it was decided that I would come back, and then I did, and then the rest is histoire.
When is the book coming out?
As soon as I can finish, I got a couple more chapters to finish.
I would assume you have many more chapters.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I could probably write on forever, but I got, there's quite a bit there, and I got almost enough. There's a couple more things I want to say, and then I'm going to turn it over. My wonderful, fabulous daughter, Ambrosia Healy, is my manager, and she's also hooked me up with an editor, and she also is hooking me up with all the publicity and probably a book deal too. So
we don't have a hard date on it, but it's clearly
we don't have a hard date on it. But it's closer and closer and closer.
Closer to gestation.
And I work on it almost every day.
Brother Healy, I'm going to be out in Petaluma area middle October. Maybe I'd love to get a club sandwich, go to the Marin Rod and Gun Club, maybe do another interview, man.
All right, I'll do that with you.
All right, man. Dan, listen, man, be safe. Much love to Patty, and we'll talk soon, man.
Yeah, hey, always fun hanging out with you, man.
I love you, man. Take care,
All
man.
righty.
Be cool.
Yeah.
Later. Bye. Well, if in fact this is the last episode of the Jake Feinberg Show at 3773 East Broadway, the Parisi Palace, it was definitely worth it. And Dan Healy, part 5 in the books, always really fun to hang. That's it for now.